Right. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are in the world today. My name is Amanda, and I want to welcome you to today's TechStrong Learning Experience. Welcome. We are super excited for you to join us today. This is going to be a great session with the folks from AWS and Inflection, so thank you to them for sponsoring today's webinar. Just a few reminders before we get introductions started in today's topic. This session is being recorded and will be available afterward on demand. We will also send you a link to your inbox after we conclude today's live program, once we get it all switched over, for you to re-review today's recording, or if you missed anything. That's what the beauty of the on-demand recording link is. So keep an eye on your inbox for that. We also invite you to join us in the chat. Today's going to be kind of a fireside chat today with all of our speakers. And so we want to engage with you for this session. So feel free to join us in the chat. Tell us where you're joining from, any kind of comments you have about today's topic matter, any questions you may have also. If you've got specific questions that you'd love to have answered by our speakers in our panel today, we recommend you use the Q&A panel on the right side of your screen. That's the best place to drop your question and will allow us to try and get to all the questions that are asked during today's session. And also, just a reminder, if we don't get to everybody's questions, we will have a team member reach out to you from either with the Effectual team or AWS to answer your questions. So if we don't get to all of them, don't fret. We will make sure that your question is answered by our point of contacts for today's session. And we also have some great links and downloads available in the handout section. This is in the resources section. This can be found on the left side of your screen. So you've got some LinkedIns for some of our great speakers and a great ebook that I recommend downloading. Those are your resources to keep. So utilize those, especially along with today's topic. So without further ado, let's just go ahead and dive into everything and get some introductions done and dive into today's conversation. Today's topic is on the culture of cloud, navigating the shift from VMware to AWS for modern IT transformation. And this is going to be a great topic moderated by the one and only Mitch Ashley. Thank you so much, Mitch, for moderating today. Do you want to get us started with some introductions, Mitch?
You bet. Thank you for that introduction and for being my publicist, Amanda. We appreciate that very much.
I'm more than happy to always do that.
Well, we have a great and very, very topical, very timely topical conversation here about modernizing applications, moving from VMware. It's very much a topic of conversation. We'll talk about some of the drivers, pricing, but more than that too. And so how do you wisely kind of approach this conversation? Because it's great to start, but there's a lot of things to consider, and we have some great experts that have a lot of experience in going through this process. I want to thank Effectual and AWS for sponsoring our conversation today on this webinar, and we'll dive into our topic in just a moment. One of the things I'd like to say, though, is we would love to have your comments, thoughts, reactions as we're having this dialogue. It really is a conversation. And you can be part of it too by just sharing your thoughts, reactions. If you have questions, you can pop them into the chat or into the Q&A tab. We'll address those along the go with the flow of the conversation or at the end if they didn't quite fit in as much as possible. But you'll actually help shape and guide a little bit of our conversation. You can be part of it. So please join in there. We appreciate in advance you doing that. So let's talk about our conversation, navigating the shift from VMware to AWS for modern IT transformation. So I'm joined by two great gentlemen, very knowledgeable on the topic today. I'm going to start with asking Michael Parks to introduce yourself, and then Tom, if you would follow up, Tom Smalding, introduce yourself, and of course, maybe you can give us a little deeper dive into who Effectual is. Michael?
Sure. I'm Michael Parks. I'm the CIO and co-founder of Effectual, which has been focusing specifically on this topic, transforming clients that are at various stages in their IT modernization journey from start to finish, and trying to find out the best ways, the best strategies. There's no one strategy for everyone. Everyone has different drivers, and I think that kind of sets us apart a bit, trying to identify those things, understanding what it is they're trying to achieve, and then we walk in and help them with a strategy around that, which best aligns with their goals.
Great having that fellow CIO perspective very much. Sometimes the CIO is a pretty lonely job, so it's great to have colleagues to collaborate with. So speaking from personal experience there. Hey, Tom, welcome. Good to have you on the conversation here today. Would you introduce yourself and then tell us about Effectual? Whoops, we're not hearing your audio, Tom, for some reason. Not coming through. And it's not that I'm hard of hearing, I don't think. But give you a chance to be audio technician for a little bit. I don't know if Amanda can help you on the back end or not, but usually if it's like my machine, it has a mind of its own and decides to suddenly reset whatever communication points. Still not hearing. Whoop, nope, not yet. Give it a try here. Nothing like being on the spot, Tom. While Tom's working on that, Michael, talk about your responsibilities as CIO. I imagine it's both for Effectual as an organization, but of course also the service offerings that you have.
We've come a long way, as the climate has changed. We've kind of worked through those different challenges for our clients, and working with some of the clients. I think when they move from into VMware, into AWS, kind of having these conversations around setting their goals and understanding what they're trying to do is the foundation. So, and we talked a little bit about this before the call. When people are trying to move into AWS or out of their current data center into AWS on VMware, what are the drivers there? So is it cost? Sure. I think there's obviously some things going on in the industry right now people are aware of, but doing a lift and shift to kind of get away from that is just part of it, right? Understanding your governance model, understanding your risks for each one of the applications is kind of where we want to get people to start understanding. If this application doesn't work, what is the impact to the business, and understanding all those different items, taking an inventory, understanding your DR strategy for each one of those things is where this all starts. And that's just kind of a short way or fancy way of saying, if you got a mess, this isn't going to fix that, right? It's some of that just basic IT grunt work that you have to do to kind of go through and fix the unstructured data problems. That's not going to go away without you guys jumping in and really doing some of the unpleasant stuff that you need to do and working with each department to figure those things out. That tends to take a lot more time than people give it credit for. It's not as IT as it is just PMing and organizing yourself, so that when you make the transition, you can reap all the benefits of the transformation. That's the biggest part, because taking a dumpster fire and moving it to a dumpster fire isn't really going to help you any, right? It's just going to be a dumpster fire, right? So in the end, it might be a different platform. So what we want to work with the client is to help them organize themselves and talk about the things that are important for your strategy, your business strategy. We want you to be successful in the end, to lower costs, be further along on the IT governance model, and understand, your security is better, your operational effectiveness is better, which also is a little harder to put in a spreadsheet, but it certainly makes you much more agile to work through your different issues that you're dealing with, I'm sure. And as you get to Amazon, those things will kind of fall into place. Now that I've cleaned up a bit of the mess here, there's a service within Amazon that aligns much better now that I understand.
Mike, if I can jump in, I think Tom is past his audio certification and is with us now, and I want him to get a chance to introduce himself. Hey,
well, I'm hoping. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Is this thing on? Wonderful.
You passed. You'll get your certificate.
Plans. Yeah. We did the technical prep work. We joined half an hour early. We checked everything, and of course, when it all goes live, that's when the gremlins come out. Exactly. So good. I'm glad you can hear me. Hi everyone. My name's Tom Spalding. I'm the Chief Growth Officer here at Effectual. So in charge of our go-to-market strategy, in charge of engaging with clients, both from a commercial and technical perspective, to Mike's point, to uncover what outcome they're trying to achieve and how we can bring the Effectual services to bear to assist them in achieving that. To Mitch's kind of question or request there, a little bit about us. We are a professional and managed services AWS only consulting partner. So we work with some of the largest enterprises and federal institutions across the US. We have a team of incredibly gifted technologists that can help a customer move from where they are today, work through those challenges through a coherent plan to get to the outcome they're trying to achieve through modernizing their IT. So in terms of the practices that we bring to bear, migration, absolutely one of them. But we also bring to bear data and analytics as a practice. We bring to bear software development, really, really topical when we talk about moving or modernizing IT, that these applications are made up of software code. So being able to have both ends of the spectrum, viewing from the infrastructure, but also coming top down from the application. And then we also are branching out into kind of the artificial intelligence, the generative AI that is starting to come out in a very pragmatic way. You'll hear from kind of Mike's overview and the way that we engage with customers very much is looking to achieve that outcome together through a realistic lens. We don't want to just jump in and start saying that, hey, everything in the public cloud is going to solve all of your challenges. We want to look at what's the workload, what's the use case, who uses it, why is it still in use, and then work backwards from there to get to an amenable outcome for everyone. So that's just a little bit about us and who I am. Thanks,
Great.
Mitch.
Thank you very much. In addition to now an esteemed audio engineer. Well, thanks, and thanks for. I'm glad your audio is working. Good to have you. You mentioned a word that always catches my attention, which is, whether it's VMware pricing or something else, there are stimulus for us wanting to consider making changes like this. But what really matters is what is the outcome that we want. It isn't just getting to a different place, right? Necessarily. It's what you want to have when you get there and what you want to experience from that, whether it's benefits or capabilities or whatever it might be. There's, if you read the papers, there's a lot of discussions about VMware pricing that's changed with the acquisition from Broadcom. And that's certainly true. That's been a big stimulus. And maybe that's enough to prompt people to say we need to move. Maybe they don't have a choice to move, and timing's, a big issue. We've got to do it quickly. That could be one reason. But you rarely benefit from, leaping before you look, right? You've got to take that step of assessing of, well, first of all, what is that outcome or a set of outcomes we want to achieve when we get this completed in whatever set of stages we take on. I'd love to hear what you're hearing from customers, either ones you've worked with to date, or those conversations you're having now. I'm sure those are going on, or what some of those outcomes are. Do you want to stop? Excuse me. So you want to start first, Tom?
Sure. It's really interesting. So you mentioned a few kind of major moves in the market that can be summarized now in a single sentence, but were months, if not years, in the making. So Broadcom acquired VMware, massive change in the market from two of the industry giants. We then saw on April 1st, Broadcom kind of severing the relationship between AWS and VMware as they took the strategy of the VMware software in a different direction. And then, so when to answer your question, those two things resulted in a lot of, I'll call it fear in the market, a lot of uncertainty, which was then compounded by kind of new pricing that was coming out to customers from Broadcom that was significantly more expensive than they had previously been paying. So two events leading to a position where a customer is now presented with a significant commercial investment that was unanticipated. What we saw in the market, this is back in April, May, and June of this year, was a really emotional reaction to that. We saw a real emotional reaction from CIOs saying, this is unfair. I'm not doing this. I will not be held hostage. I will not be kind of given no choice but to pay more than I was anticipating for the same service that I've been receiving. Now, to your point, however, there needs to be more consideration before you make a major change like this, before you move from one of the core technologies of your business over to something completely new. That inherently kind of provides, introduces risk. It can potentially introduce kind of a reputational damage should you get it wrong. These things are incredibly difficult to manage. Michael has actually done these kind of data center transformations from a CIO's perspective, as I imagine you have, Mitch, and you know how tough it is, that any change inherently is going to come with a risk. As a result, kind of, you've got an emotional reaction where I want to move fast, I want to change, I want to accelerate this because of how I feel. But also there's a business objective there of mitigating cost. But that is a legitimate, I want to avoid that cost. It's legitimate, combined with the emotional aspect is a really big driver to change and to accept probably more risk than you normally would. On the flip side, when you look at things a little bit more objectively and try and remove that emotional aspect, yes, avoiding cost is incredibly important where possible, but actually avoiding downtime, avoiding that reputational risk, avoiding the upsetting the entire business is potentially more cost, is going to introduce more cost than if you just pay for the renewal. So what we saw across the board was for 3 months were deep conversations about how can we move quickly, how can we avoid this renewal, how can we change the underlying technology of our business. But after 3 months and after things started to calm down and that we kind of counseled customers to assess where they are, assess what this change would mean to them, assess the level of effort to execute it, that actually it became more cost effective to stay on the technology for a little bit longer and then put in place a much more rigid and robust plan to change that mitigated all of the risks that were previously identified and ultimately would end up in the same result, maybe a little bit low, maybe a little bit more in the future than we would like, but would be better overall when you kind of view these things holistically.
Well, you were referenced there, Michael. I don't mean to give you any new titles, but I have a feeling you're kind of the data center transformation whisperer, given your background. You've been through this rodeo multiple times. I appreciate what Tom was saying about the emotional reaction, right, to a vendor changing pricing, increasing price, maybe changing the products. We deal with this quite a bit, but it's a very substantial change we saw with VMware. I can imagine that prompting a lot of conversation. Appreciate your perspective on this.
I think the emotional part is hard because you're getting especially from a CIO standpoint, you've already presented your budget to your finance department, and then you have we're hearing this insane amount of increases, numbers that are going to rock your CFO out of his chair, kind of numbers. So they're not good. So then what can you do? And if you're in a data center already managing VMware in your own data center, well, you're already accepting a bunch of risk already, right? That goes without saying. And sure, cost is very important, no doubt about it. The other parts are you may have a compliance requirement that is now cropped up and said you now need to do something about where you are. Is your strategy going to incorporate higher security or different security standards as well? So moving it out of the data center and out of your VMware kind of solution today could be achieved by consuming native services with Amazon. There's a strategy for that. I think inherently Amazon to AWS, the way it's set up, probably solves a bunch of problems people are dealing with already with IAM and the different strategy and services that they can layer on top of what you have. Addresses a lot of those things, and ultimately, like we were talking about before, it's hard to quantify operational effectiveness. When you move from one place to another, can you put that in a spreadsheet? Not easy, but what you'll find within time is that because those resources can be used elsewhere that you're currently using to solve problems or fix things, troubleshoot things. Once you've got a solid foundation within AWS, you tend to find you can breathe a little better. You're meeting your compliance needs. Your CFO is now happy, and you're able to start looking at other projects that are going to help you move the IT organization into where you'd want to go in the future. Not in the timeline you want it, as Tom alluded to. It does take a little more time to kind of do that evaluation, get a solid plan together. And here the good news is we're here to help you do that. Based on all the clients that we've dealt with, you're all normal, right? You've all been to this place. We've all seen it. So I doubt you're gonna find something we haven't heard. So we're going to be able to walk you through the different options you have, the solutions. Many of them are pretty easy to implement once you've gone through the process once, and we can walk you through that. And I think that's a big upside to Tom's experience and the team's experience about how we can create this for you and get you where you want to go.
Tom, talk about, because a lot of things get folded in. Michael's mentioned a number of them. People may have already had plans, desires, or maybe even starting down the road of moving some things to the cloud. So it isn't necessarily a first time they've thought about this. Matter of fact, they probably have examined a number of options, might be on that journey. How does this conversation, how do those activities inform the new conversation of, well, we have some new reasons why we want to do this maybe more quickly?
I think that it depends on you got the carrot and the stick. It's the what's the carrot we're trying to get to. Maybe that was what initially started the original project. If, like you said, in a situation where, well, we already have some workloads there, we're already kind of in the cloud, we're running a hybrid, that was most likely a carrot. There was a business outcome you were trying to achieve that centered around, maybe it was innovation or agility or the desire not to expand an on-premise workload, and therefore you had the ability to spin things up a little bit faster in the public cloud. So you've got a carrot there. So that's, if you were already on the way down, you've got that carrot drawing you towards it. And what has been introduced is a stick. It's hey guys, the faster we move here, the more cost avoidance that we could potentially introduce to the project. Now, kind of to Mike's point, though, most customers and most companies are not migration specialists. Normally, these are people who have a day job, who have been doing operations, have been managing and governing an environment for years, and are now being asked to adopt an entirely new, different set of skill sets whilst continuing to run their day job. So that stick of kind of, well, go faster, go faster, go faster, for somebody that hasn't done it before, it's like asking somebody to drive a car that they've never done before. It's like, well, they know how it might work in practice, but if you jump in the passenger seat and say, okay, we're going to go nice and slow, and we're going to kind of do this in closed off roads, you're going to have a pretty good experience. If you jump in the passenger seat and say, right, we're going straight onto the freeway, good luck, it's probably not going to end well. So keep focusing on the carrot, keep focusing on why you're doing it. And to Mike's point as well, be kind of considerate for the timeline, right? Be transparent with your financial director for sure. If it's going to cost more, just be upfront about it. Maybe get them involved to assist when it comes to kind of having those conversations with Broadcom and with AWS. Focus on the carrot, not the stick. Don't try and get on the freeway too quickly. And then the final thing that I'll put kind of on the table here that we can have a quick chat about is not everything needs to go. So again, there's this whole driver to, well, we were going there anyway, let's see if we can't get there faster. That doesn't necessarily mean that you've got to empty the data center in its entirety. Look at what the workload does, why it's sitting there, what it's been doing for the entirety of its existence. And if it's completely steady state, if it's not something that's a target for innovation, and it's mission critical, and it's been running absolutely without issues for 3, 4, 5 years, probably not a great candidate to move. If you can't justify moving it for the sake of saying we went 100% all in, is not a business driver or a business outcome. That's effectively keeping up with the Joneses. So look at what each workload is going to do, and then prioritize as well. So if you've got that carrot and you've been kind of slowly moving over there, maybe you were looking at the low-hanging fruit, the easy stuff first. Maybe reevaluate your thinking of a prioritization. What is going to have the biggest cost impact from the data center, and move that one first. That doesn't necessarily accelerate the timeline. You were going to have to go through that anyway, but it will have a bigger impact on the project by reshuffling the priorities. But again, always keep in mind that yes, this stick has been introduced, but the reason that you started was the carrot, and that's where people should focus.
Well, it's a bigger kind of web of things to consider, right? It may be, well, contractually we can get out of this with VMware. Maybe that's easy, maybe it's not. But you have a lot of other agreements, right? You have in the data center, whether it's the data center itself, the capitalization of it, services you have that you're also running in your own facility. So there's a bit of a web of, it isn't flip the light switch from, A to B. And now these other, we're there and our costs are all there. You have some residual costs that you're going to, at some point, they'll be gone, but they don't disappear on day one. That's a sit down. I mean, imagine you have that, Michael, a pretty good handle of what you're paying for what in your budget already, but knowing what those contractual obligations, you got to do a little bit of research then too.
I think this exercise, what we find is most people don't have a great handle on what they're spending, right? To be honest.
Okay.
And so what we find is as they kind of do that inventory that Tom is talking about to do the prioritization, let's just say there's a lot of savings to be found, right? Where just basic discipline around who's using this application and why, who's going to stand up and raise their hand and say, yes, this is critical to me. I think sometimes we find that there's not a person to do that, right? So that why are we doing this? Are we creating a report for someone who's not here anymore? That's a real example. There's a bunch of easy wins as you kind of go through the non-IT discipline of cleaning up what is under your IT umbrella. And when you do a migration, you start digging into that and finding out like, Fred's not here. He's not been here 2 years, but we're spending $10,000 a month creating a report for him. And sometimes that just happens, right? And I think every organization is going to find that as people come and go, you're gonna find a lack of rigor around some of these things. So that's a starting point. That's a plus. Again, hard to put in a spreadsheet, where that goes, but you can obviously calculate the savings when you find things like that and present that, help offset some of the costs you're going to have during the migration. I think every organization needs that. So that goes back to, you're storing a bunch of unstructured data. First off, there's a risk of that from a security standpoint. Who owns this stuff? Why is it here? Why do we still have it exposed? That's a big security thing you want to address, but also the cost to house it and store it and back it up and all those other things. So as you kind of go through those things, you make your policy or update your policy. We're not accessing this data anymore. We haven't accessed this data in 60 months. We need to fix our retention policy and lower our costs and lower our risks. And we have that opportunity as we kind of walk through these different things.
I'm curious, you can study things, to death. I'm not saying we're suggesting that, but you can really dive deep into this and kind of get lost in the details. When customers come to you, are they often just not sure how to get started? Sometimes all that complexity or the size and breadth of what has to be done is a little bit daunting to get your full head around. You kind of feel like you're inside the bubble as opposed to be able to get perspective.
Tom's got stories on that too, and I think people.
Okay, I'd love to hear.
I think people have an idea of what they want to do, right? And
okay.
So, and sometimes that's a bit dangerous because that puts them on a path of where they shouldn't go, right? Okay, that sounds like a plan, but we've seen this movie before and it doesn't end well, right? So that's the conversation you have. It's a little difficult to have with a client, but I think it's one we have to have. Here is the proper way. This is going to provide you where you want to go. I understand the goal, and let's write that up on the board in just plain non-IT English up on the board. This is where I'm trying to get to. Okay, great. Now we understand what you're trying to get to, and that's the most important thing. And you may have some subcategories under that. Now let's talk about the methodology and why this won't work. It's going to deviate here. And this is what we can show you has worked, a dozen times for other clients that are very similar to you. And this is how we've gotten there. I think that's very valuable to them, understanding that. And sometimes, you have to eat a little crow along the way here for some of the clients. Like, we thought this was going to work, and well, it's not. Here's why. And we can give you examples of that. And, don't ask us, ask the clients, they've been down there. We'll give you a reference for that. And I think we've done that numerous times. And I think, Tom, can you think of one that
the immediate one that comes to mind is a customer mid-flight in a migration to native, and they get about 3 months into the project, and they're looking at the cost of what they projected the cost to be, and then what the cost started to accrue, and they couldn't find the delta. and the delta turned out to be Microsoft licensing. So when they were migrating things, their engineers were selecting the EC2 instance on AWS with license included because it was a Windows application. So that's what was absolutely required to make that application work. So everybody gets into the room and like our AWS costs are about 40% higher than we were expecting them to be, and we couldn't work out why. Oh, we found out it's because we're launching license included. We need to stop that. We've already got an ELA with Microsoft, so we're going to install our own stuff on this. Oh no, we didn't look at the ELA before we started moving, and we don't have license portability, and this license doesn't expire for another year and a couple of months. So mid-flight in a migration, we had to undo everything. We actually ended up moving them over to the previous VMware cloud on AWS that allowed us to effectively leverage the same licenses that they already had under ELA. And then we waited for a year and then moved them over to native because that was the time at which they were able to reduce their ELA so that they could start purchasing license included on the cloud. So the cost on AWS was 40% higher than the original assessment had shown because they hadn't included the licensing. But they were able to accept that because their ELA costs had reduced by 50 to 60%. So it was a net savings. But I can tell you those were some very tense conversations in a boardroom of, we had an assessment done. This was the projected cost. We're way over budget. Why? And it was because there was a miss. So that's one example of where kind of, yes, it's tough to make sure that you can cover off every single little tiny piece before you start down the road. Having said that, though, I'll give you an example of where that was the inverse, and it was actually okay. For another customer, we made a plan to migrate their applications, and we put them into 4 waves. And those waves were defined as, we know everything about this application down to the last ones and zeros. These are tier 1. We can tell you everything about them. Here's tier 2, where we can tell you 90%, maybe 80% of everything about them. We know who uses them, why they use them, etc. Tier 3, 50-50. We think we know everything, but when we move it, if something breaks, we'll fix it. Tier 4, no idea. That was how we categorize things. And that was okay. We didn't have to go into a really deep assessment of tier 4. We accepted that risk in partnership with the customer. We started moving things over. We got to tier 4. We moved everything over and we waited for the phone to ring. And the phone did ring. And it was a regional office in Minnesota saying, I came to work this morning and for some reason my printer isn't working. And that's when the IT team, that's what those VMs did. Oh, that's good. That's good to know. And that was okay. So you knew enough to mitigate the risk at tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3. And then you accepted that you didn't know everything. So there are situations where that's okay. You can start without having to kind of do analysis paralysis. But you also have to make sure that you do enough analysis up front that you don't end up with 40% extra costs and kind of a year in purgatory in order to kind of move the project forwards.
It's one of those things when you, akin to moving servers out of the data center and you don't know, there's no label on it, there's no IP number on it, you can't find anywhere. It's running though. So you go to the proverbial disconnect the Ethernet cable and wait for someone to call you, right? Sometimes that's what you have to do. That's the ugly part of it. And that's that tier 4 part. So
I've been down that path before. You just hope it's not the CEO's database
right.
Nobody knew about, that nobody knew how to log into, and that contractor left 5 years ago.
Yeah.
But no, I totally know what you mean. It's just like, we're going to thoughtfully unplug it and watch for a response and see what happens. And, it may be nothing, it may be something, but sometimes that's your only option. I like the way you categorize that, Tom, working with that customer and assessing sort of your understanding level of each of those categories. But imagine even with that, right, there is this app connects to this database, but it only does it every quarter. And we didn't thought about that. And that's where it's a rule on the firewall. We didn't trace it down, didn't figure that out. There still is the unexpected. And so you kind of, the unknowns are going to pop up. And it's just a matter of having a process for dealing with it and setting expectations. We're going to find some things.
And sometimes the process is we're going to roll up our sleeves and jump in the trenches. And like to Mike's point as well, kind of like we've been there, we've seen it all. A lot of customers do express kind of fear to us that like, oh, we can't believe we let it get this bad, or like, we're really sorry, we don't know the answer to that question. And it's almost kind of like they feel like alone in that they're the only person that doesn't have 100% handle on everything. I haven't found a single customer, a single project we've engaged with where a customer has said, I understand 100% of what's going on. And if a customer ever said that to me, I would run in the other direction.
Well, I'd pull out the firewall rules and I'd say, show me justification for each one of the firewall, because I would never get the answer to that. It'd be 3,000 lines of rules, but and 10 of them are any sprinkled in, right? So that's the norm, right? And that's just human nature. You're overwhelmed, you're trying to get something fixed, and that any rule goes in there and doesn't always get pulled out, right? So it's there for a while, and as you kind of go through this process, that is definitely one of the things you have to focus on, is cleaning up that firewall rule set and justifying each one of those things, which just makes you just a safer, more agile organization, because now you understand what you need to do, why that rule is there, and then going back and justifying the application, in totality.
We'll have to have a war stories therapy session for some of those. I can tell you about a website server one time that we won't even go there. Yeah, let's transition to, with all the activity in the market around talking about migrating from VMware, moving to AWS, or some formal programs. reInvent just happened. There were some announcements around some of those programs, some AI things. So there's a lot of things going, a lot of things happening. It's easy to kind of say, well, what all of this is useful? What's real now? What's coming? How do I take advantage of it? That's another benefit of working with a partner that is plugged in really well with the hyperscaler. Tom, talk about some of the things that you're aware of and how you're helping customers sort through those, what's here and what's coming that will be of aid to them in migrating.
It was, really encouraging at reInvent to see kind of AWS put forward a really crystal clear strategy when it came to the VMware workloads. So they've come out with the Elastic VMware service that is now in preview, and they launched it in kind of true AWS fashion of they are offering customers choice. They're not telling customers this is the best place for your VMware workloads. They're saying, we understand some customers may not want to leave VMware when it comes to their modernization journey. And so we're offering them a place to put those. So it's bringing your own license. So for those customers that wanted to move but couldn't in the time available to them, and therefore signed a long-term renewal, AWS now came out with we understand, and here's an option. On top of that, though, they also kind of released through the Amazon Q umbrella, the brand of services under Amazon Q, they launched the ability to use automation to migrate applications off of the VMware hypervisor. So this is, as I mentioned at the start, kind of where we're looking at pragmatic applications for generative AI, looking for pragmatic applications for these massive data sets that can now act in an agentic fashion. This was one use case they brought to the table where we can help you leave the hypervisor and we can build a factory that's going to help you do it faster and in a more dependable fashion. Both of those kind of those two releases almost seem kind of mutually exclusive. I've launched the ability to stay on VMware, and I've launched the ability to automate your way away from it. And that comes back to this kind of the Amazon ethos of providing customers choice. So that was really great to see. But again, to your point, Mitch, all that's done now is add another couple of variables for customers to consider. It's like, great, I had 100 choices, now I have 102. And so that goes back to Mike's point of kind of sit down and in non-IT speak, put it up on the whiteboard of what are we trying to do? Who is the user? What is the outcome we're trying to achieve? Are we just moving for moving's sake, or is there a driver pushing us or something pulling us? Be really critical of the outcome, Because if you've got that North Star, when it does get to a point that it's time to roll up your sleeves, we've made a decision out of the 102 we've got in front of us. When it gets hard and you have to get down into the trenches, everybody is looking at that North Star of, I know why I'm doing this. If you can unify people with the why, any IT project is going to be much more successful.
How about your experience, Michael? I know you're of course plugged well into what's happening with AWS. As you hear announcements like the VMware announcements, we also had some announcements, or they did, around developer queue using AI to do some kind of assessment of the application and architecture. Pretty short on details there because that's obviously, early kind of announcement. I don't know how much of that is usable yet, but as you look at those options and put yourself in a customer situation, how do you evaluate that?
I think it's a little early, honestly. I think going back to some of the things Tom said here, the people are the most important resource you have during this migration, right? So the IT tools, certainly helpful, but they're tools, right? In the end, it's really the people. You have to have a solid, well thought out plan, and there is some rah-rah sessions that have to happen to get everybody on board. And then you can evaluate the tools, some of which we're very hopeful that a lot of the AI tools can be utilized for efficiency's sake, but also from accuracy's sake, right? They do things better. They do it more consistently. We're really open to that and hoping that's going to happen. Where there are errors, because again, the downside of humans are they make mistakes, right? They're fallible. Where AI tends to, if given the right information, will consistently do things, and they don't need coffee breaks or bathroom breaks or anything else. They'll just keep grinding away. So we're hoping to utilize them to help lower timelines, get things done more cost effective and efficiently, and give the client a more consistent outcome with documentation, which we think is another thing that really lacks a lot of times with the modernization of different IT infrastructures. Where's the backup? And IT people historically hate to do documentation. I get that, but getting an AI agent to do that would be a total win.
That's usually when I can't hear you. The cell phone connection's not very good. What'd you say about documentation?
Because in a year or 2 years from now, you'll be looking back like, how did we do that? And it's like, oh, there's no documentation. I'm like, ugh, here we are, right? So getting that documentation done right from the get-go is key to, I think, measuring the success of the migration in the first place.
Well, it's tough to generalize in a question like this. So maybe you can share some experiences, some stories with, anonymizing the customer. But when you mentioned workload, Tom, some people might say, well, that just means an application. Workload might mean more things than just what the app itself does and other parts of how all the parts fit together. If you've gone through this process, give us an examples of workloads that were very conducive to moving to the cloud, situations like that, and maybe some that were less and problematic that you had to really make some hard choices about. Do you move that?
Yep. So the easy one first, or well, not easy, but a good candidate. We had a supply chain company that's migrated a 3-tier application, so kind of very classic architecture. However, they moved it in a really considered fashion, where they ended up moving the kind of the web and the app tier to VMware Cloud on AWS at the time. But they actually moved the database directly to native AWS. This was an Oracle database. It hadn't been touched in a long time. And the customer took advantage of the fact that they were already undergoing a change to upgrade that database across the wire. So they replicated the origin VM up into the relational database service, RDS, directly on the native platform. And they upgraded the Oracle version at the same time. They kept both the databases in sync while they ran tests to make sure that the new version of Oracle would support them, and they were able to do license included on the platform as well. So ultimately, streamlined some procurement as well as kind of helping with kind of retiring some of their Oracle contracts. Then, once they'd done that, they had to test the actual connection between those two platforms was robust enough to handle database traffic. That was a big question mark at the time. This was back in 2019. But this was a customer that was first off willing to go through a proof of concept to test this out. This was their first entry into the cloud. So they wanted to kind of maintain some of the VMware operations, but then take advantage of some of the public clouds, kind of like big kind of shining examples of the value it can provide. And for 3 weeks, they beat the connection up to make sure that it could handle the traffic back and forth, and it proved itself to be more performant than the on-prem version. And so that's a great example of a customer that's looked at the cloud, dissected the value that they wanted to get from it, and then executed a project that kind of put two different things in two different places, but ultimately got to a fantastic outcome after doing that QA and that testing. That's a good example. An example that another one was, we had another customer who was on their way to AWS wanting to move to the cloud. And so approached their data center provider 6 months before their renewal. And they said, we would like to do just a 6-month renewal to buy ourselves a 1-year time frame to migrate to the public cloud, please. The data center provider said, absolutely no worries. Here is your month-to-month contract that is 5 times more than you've currently been paying. If you would like to lock yourselves in for a 3-year cost, here is exactly how much cheaper it is. So the data center provider, doing what any good business would do, is trying to reduce churn and kind of keep their customers with them. Hats off to this particular customer because they turned around and kind of called the data center's bluff and said, okay, you know what, please take this as our notification to terminate the contract. We will not be renewing. Feel free to turn the lights off on November 1st was the date. We were then engaged we started the sales cycle. A month later, we actually closed on the project, which left the delivery teams 4 months to migrate the entirety of the data center before they turned off the lights. So we started moving things in an accelerated fashion. And the applications that were really like the applications that existed in the estate were the ones that everybody kind of has nightmares about. It was SAP, it was Oracle, it was Essbase, it was homegrown applications, it was some stuff we're not sure what it is, but it's been running, don't touch it. And that was very much a lift and shift. That was very much a kind of, we're going to start migrating across the wire. And when it gets there, if it's broken, we're going to fix it on the fly. We had as the project started to draw to a close, the final weekend of migrations, we had a Zoom bridge that was open for 72 hours. We had an effectual kind of representative on that call for the full 72 hours as customers and vendors were jumping on and off. And the challenge, the bit that was missed was one of the applications was hairpinning back on-prem. So it was coming in from the internet, coming down on-prem, then going back up, then going back down on-prem, then going back out to the internet. And so the performance was terrible. It kept dropping things. And that's because it was kind of an application that was really, really happy on premise, not great in the cloud, but it needed to get there for business reasons. It was a 72 hours that was really tough to tackle. It got it done. But the very next day, kind of everyone took a big deep breath, said, we did it, well done. Right now we have to start doing application modernization and start getting into the software because it shouldn't be sitting there. Like we need to move it into cloud native. So 2 completely different examples of where kind of one customer was moving to the cloud and being very particular about what value they wanted to derive from it, and another customer that was being driven out of the data center and was less kind of focused on the value the cloud was going to bring them in the short term, and accepted that pain, understanding that in the long term, they had more work to get done.
That's called burning the platform starting at one end. So you have no option but moving off, right?
And that's the trenches. That's a 72-hour Zoom bridge where everyone's like troubleshooting. People are pointing fingers like it's a networking problem. No, it's a platform problem. Everyone's trying to fix it, but it's very high tense, very tense environment.
When that any rule gets pulled out.
Asterisk, not asterisk. Yes. So this is a really big conversation we obviously can't cover the depths any way here. But how do you start the conversation, Michael, about data and security? You hear about data has gravity, it's difficult to move, a lot involved in it. Once you move it, you don't move it back, all that kind of thing. Security is another thing to consider. Again, those could be 5-hour conversations we could have here each. Maybe how do you start that conversation with a new customer?
What is the IT governance that you have adopted as an organization? That's kind of where it starts. Sometimes there is no IT governance, right? It's just we want to be secure. What we try to start talking to them about, well, let's have that conversation around what do you have in place today, and which one of those models best meets what you're trying to do. That could be PCI, or it could be 27001, it could be a bunch of different things. So we'll try to steer them into an already pre-made IT governance model. And if we can incorporate that during the migration, like, hey, you guys look like this, you weren't quite there, but we can make a few changes here along the way and actually get you into a compliance model that you could adopt as an organization, become a better IT organization as you kind of modernize through your journey. Tom's very much, brought the right people on from our security team to work with them, coach them, and if we have to bring in a third party, we do that, to talk to them about what you're trying to achieve. And again, it's back to forget the IT and the security part. Let's put it up on the wall. What are the drivers for what you're trying to accomplish? That's the conversation. And then, do you actually have real compliance from SEC or FCC or credit cards or whatever? Do you actually have those things? Sometimes people aren't aware that you actually should be using this compliance model based on the workloads we've looked at. Maybe you thought about that. And sometimes the answer is we do a self-assessment, which ain't great, right? So that's it's an answer. But we would say, okay, well, you would want a third party. If you really want to adopt these things, have that third party come in and talk to you about the things that are a bit lacking, and where we can make some pretty easy improvements to get you to where you want to be, and have that as part of your discussion with your clients to say, this year, not only have we moved to AWS, but we've also raised our security platform to incorporate a new governance model. Did we lose you, Mitch?
We may have lost Mitch, but I can jump in off the back of that.
Go ahead.
Oh,
Yep,
he's back.
I just got knocked off and back on. Go ahead.
So that was kind of it. I think the conversation kind of flows pretty easily, just starting off with baby steps and putting it up on the board, talking about what they're trying to do. What I think people try to continue to move the security bar, but it tends to have conflict with the operational agility. So security, if it's, we always say, if it makes things a little harder, that's what you want. Security, you want to find that blend or that balance of operational agility, but you gotta weed out the shadow IT, and you got to have a governance model and a process in place. All CIOs are trying to do that, right? Like, not just because it's a cost standpoint, but you're trying to lower your exposure to any security breaches, which is a constant battle as you kind of go through this process, and making sure that you've got the right process in place, the right tools in place. And a lot of that can be achieved as you go into AWS natively. Those things just happen, which, like, hey, let's take a benefit. Let's take a win on that and say, hey, there's a control statement in this 27,000 thing I've been trying to do. It just got covered just by moving into Amazon. And there's a bunch of things like that. We can tailor your application to make sure it meets those control statements.
We're just about at the end of time. Kind of a funny way to ask this question. If you were going to advise someone who wanted to engage a company like Effectual, yes, they should hire you. Get that would be one piece of advice. But what advice would you offer to potential organizations about how to work effectively, get the best outcomes working with a company like Effectual? Tom, do you want to start us out?
Sure. We've seen success, or one of the biggest indicators of success has been somebody internal at an organization stands up and says, I'm going to champion this change. So it's really easy to kind of put your feet under the desk and say, right, status quo, like, let's keep going until somebody forces me kind of to do what to do differently. Michael, kind of something that stuck with me from kind of working with Mike for as long as we have been, he once said that a CIO's superpower is their ability to drag their feet. That's what the CIO can do that because they are in charge of the exposure of the organization and keeping the lights on and keeping everyone functioning. So the biggest indicator of success we've seen when kind of we've been engaged is having somebody who's put their hand up and said, I'm going to be a change agent myself. Normally kind of that doesn't have to be an executive sponsor. That can just be somebody who's really motivated to kind of transform the IT. And if you can't identify that person in your organization of like, oh, that person would be great at this, become it yourself. Because kind of people have made their careers and have moved on into C-suite positions because they've executed really tough transformations. And other companies have looked over and said, I want to do that. So I'm going to pick the person who kind of executed it and championed it. So it's a really great way kind of to kind of advance your own career, but also that when you engage outside help, it gives us a pivotal place to go to remove obstacles that exist kind of as you go through a project. So I'd say that for us is if you are looking to engage somebody like us, look to bring in outside help, identify who the change agent is going to be in the organization, become that person yourself if one doesn't exist, because that's what we've seen as a real indication of whether or not something's going to be successful.
Great. Michael, your thoughts?
I would say you can't be fearful. You have to be able to be thoughtful about making the change, but the benefits are so huge by moving from a traditional data center stack into AWS and working with someone like an Effectual, where we have a large client base that we can talk about the success and the challenges along the way. Your unknowns for you are just unknown for you. For us, we've already seen that. Right. So we know we're comfortable with that, living in that world of, oh, it's a bit of a mess. I get it. We're okay with that because here's how we're going to fix it for you. And here's why we know it's successful because we can point to several dozen clients that we're in the same boat. So I think working with Effectual gives you that breadth of knowledge and, the depth of bench to understand you're not alone on this. You're a change agent. That's true. But you're not just sticking your toe out there in the lake and hoping for the best. You have a team of people here that have seen a lot of messes, and we're okay with them when we can pick them up and point you in the right direction, get you where you want to go from a cost, operational agility, and from a security standpoint, all in the same migration.
Wonderful. Well, thanks to you both, Tom and Michael, and thank you to Effectual and AWS for sponsoring our conversation today. We appreciate the folks that have joined us. They're part of our conversation. Be sure and check out effectual.com. I have the website correct? Yeah. .com. Very good. Definitely, there was an ebook in the handout section you can grab. I'd also like to have you fill out our brief 1-minute survey. So with that, again, thanks to everyone for participating today, Tom and Michael. I'm going to hand it back to you, Amanda.
Awesome. Wonderful. Well, this has been a great conversation. I was getting cozy in my seat listening. So thank you to all of you for joining us today. If there are any questions that you have that we didn't get to, please know that we will make sure that you are reached out to. If you have anything come up afterwards, feel free to connect with our speakers on LinkedIn. Don't forget to download the resources. Also, those are yours to keep. Just a few reminders before we close out officially. This session has been recorded and will be available afterward on demand. We will also send you a link to your inbox once we conclude everything with a link to view the recording in case you wanted to browse back earlier in the conversation that we had today. We also invite you to please take our survey. It's just about 1 minute of your time, a few questions that helps us continue to create great programs and content like these, create great speakers to join these webinars. So feel free to fill that out for us. And with that being said, I definitely want to thank Mitch. Thank you so much for moderating. Thank you to Michael and Tom for joining us today and speaking on their experience. And with that being said, we want to thank all of you for joining today's TechStrong learning experience, and we hope you have a good rest of your day. Bye for now.
Thanks.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Mitch.
Thank you.